Right. So there never seems to be a convenient time to do this. I've been putting off for a long time and I'm running out of time. So the title of this is Undecided. And this is basically just all the political thoughts that I've had that I feel like I need to share for whatever reason. There are several issues with the current political situation that are readily apparent to me, but seems that no one is addressing. So I will do so by articulating some thoughts regarding some dots I have connected that reveal a trajectory that concerns me. Hopefully, my comments will start a discussion. At age 15, a young Jew named Eli Wiesel, it might be Wiesel, not sure the pronunciation, was taken with his family and the rest of his village to Auschwitz by the Nazis in May of 1944, where 90% of his townspeople were immediately murdered upon arrival, including his mother and younger sister. Later, he would have to listen as his father was beaten by a German soldier, and he could do nothing to stop it. His father died from his wounds inflicted from this beating shortly after. In his book titled Night, Eli outlines his experiences as a Jewish prisoner in the Auschwitz and Buchenwald concentration camps in the order they happened. He said the following: "Always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." It is on that statement that I frame what I have to say today. The Asch conformity test was conducted in the early 1950s and showed the human tendency to stick with a mob, even though it is clearly wrong. In this experiment, one person, the unknowing subject, is placed in a room full of actors. The conductor of the experiment held up a piece of paper with 3 lines on it and a second piece of paper with a single line drawn on it. Each participant was asked to say aloud which line matched the length of that on the first card. Before the experiment, all actors were given detailed instructions on how they should respond to each trial or card presentation. The actors would always nominate one comparator and have unanimous responses. The group was seated such that the real participant always responded last. The actors all showed the wrong answer on purpose to see whether the subjects would disagree using their own logic or go with everyone else's answers simply because there is strength in numbers. 37 out of a sample size of 50 chose the incorrect answer, even though it was very easy to identify the correct option. In his opinion regarding the study results, Asch put it this way: that intelligent, well-meaning young people are willing to call white black is a matter of concern. In July 1961, 3 months after the start of the trial of German Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, Professor Stanley Milgram and his team decided to measure the willingness of study participants to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform acts conflicting with their personal conscience. Milgram devised his psychological study to explain the psychology of genocide and answer the popular contemporary question: could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? The experiment required ordinary people to ask a volunteer, who was part of Milgram's scheme, interrogated questions, and then administer shocks through a machine if the volunteer answered incorrectly. The conductor of the experiment took the authoritative role and asked unknowing subjects to increase the voltage of the shock after each question was incorrectly answered. Unbeknownst to the subject administering the shocks were fake, and the volunteer was a hired actor. For the test to be truly accurate, the shock administrator was led to believe it was real, and each shock came at the series of horrifying screams from the volunteer. In one case, the experimenter, or authority figure, told the subjects that the volunteer had a heart condition which they expected to awaken the conscience of the subjects. If at any time the subject indicated a desire to halt the experimenter was instructed to give specific verbal prods. The prods were in this order: please continue, or please go on. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. Before conducting the experiment, Milgram polled 14 Yale University senior year psychology majors to predict the behavior of 100 hypothetical subjects. All of the poll respondents believed that only a very small fraction of the subjects would be prepared to inflict the maximum voltage. The range was from 0 to 3 out of 100 with an average of 1.2. Milgram also informally polled his colleagues and found that they too believed very few subjects would progress beyond a very strong shock. Milgram also polled 40 psychiatrists from a medical school, and they believed that by a 10th shock, when the victim demands to be free, most subjects would stop the experiment. They predicted that by the 300-volt shock, when the victim refuses to answer, only 3.73% of the subjects would still continue, and they believed that only a little over 1/10 of 1% of the subjects would administer the highest shock on the board. In Milgram's first set of experiments, 100% of the 40 experiment participants administered shocks of 300 volts. Subjects were uncomfortable doing so and displayed varying degrees of tension and stress. These signs included sweating, trembling, stuttering, biting their lips, groaning, and digging their fingernails into their skin, and some were even having nervous laughing fits or seizures. 14 of the 40 subjects showed definite signs of nervous laughing or smiling. Every participant paused the experiment at least once to question it. Most continued after being assured by the experimenter. Some said they would refund the money if they were paid for participating. In the end, 26 of the 40 of experiment participants administered the experiment's final massive 450-volt shock, which, had it been real, would be fatal. Milgram said of his experiment, "I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives, against hurting others, and with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. Ordinary people, simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part, can become agents in a terrible destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear, and they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority." According to his own results, only 35%, or 1 in 3 people, have such resources needed to resist authority. Some social experiments have yielded shocking insight into how common people's behavior changes when placed in positions of authority. The famed Stanford prison experiment is an example of how ego inserts itself everywhere, even into the minds of every participant, of a fictitious scenario that every participant knew was fictitious. Upon the roles being explained to the 3 different kinds of participants, namely the prisoners, the guards, and the warden, ego-motivated responses to their circumstances. The prisoners immediately chose to rebel against the rules created for them, and the role of the guards required them to keep order. And to do so, they changed their behavior to do whatever necessary to accomplish that responsibility, even though it was all make-believe. Most sinister of all was what happened to Philip Zimbardo, the scientist responsible for the experiment, who assigned himself the role of the warden. The fact that he was running an experiment was eclipsed by his anger at a specific prisoner for not fitting the mold created for him by Zimbardo, which stated he would remain complicit, that he would be a good little prisoner and do what he was ordered. Rather than detaching himself and observing an experiment impartially, he wanted to see vengeance dealt out to those who had broken his rules. He had given himself the role of dictator, and had been sucked into the narrative of power, and for disobeying him, he wanted to see those who had disobeyed suffer. Disregard the fact they were college students who had volunteered for the experiment, and that it was an experiment at all. The narrative that any order should be obeyed by the authority figure who gave it overshadowed whether or not the order was ridiculous, petty, or necessary at all. If given, it had to be obeyed, based on no other principle other than the ego of the authority figure who had given the command. If disobeyed, the position of authority, of respect, was in jeopardy. Thus, pretend wardens and guards transformed into psychopathic torturers bent on breaking the wills of those they gave commands to. Never mind that none of it was real. The Stanford prison experiment yielded shocking insight into how common people's behavior changes when placed in positions of authority. Robert Ingersoll said the following of Abraham Lincoln: "If you want to find out what a man is to the bottom, give him power. Any man can stand adversity. Only a great man can stand prosperity. It is the glory of Abraham Lincoln that he never abused power, only on the side of mercy. He was a perfectly honest man. When he had power, he used it in mercy." I share these three social experiments to generate awareness that as a result of COVID, our political situation, and the relationship of the police with Black Lives Matter, we are seeing these three experiments replayed in real time at a massive scale. The following is taken from Letters from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, "I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods or direct action," who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises a Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Rephrased, inaction and silence from the moderate is viewed as a shallow understanding of the suffering other humans are enduring, and that inaction and refusal to confront what is ugly is more frustrating than the violence of devoted haters. Speaking to the lukewarm acceptance, I must admit that as a white moderate, I don't know the best way to go out of my way and introduce myself to others who've been wronged. I'm not so sure this is a tendency of the white moderate so much as a trait of humanity. Regardless which it is, I know certain people have been wronged, but feel awkward in giving my condolences. The same way it is hard to give condolences to a coworker whose father has died. Sometimes you simply don't know what to say. I feel this way towards women who have been raped, children who have been abused, and also towards the Black community. It feels inappropriate to bring up what has happened as it reawakens the trauma all over again. I don't know what to do, and I certainly don't know what to say. But what is clear is that I must say something. All of us must. And recently, through the last several years, the Black community has guided us to do that by making a statement that they are shouting from the streets and rooftops. A correct response to their cry is, "We hear you. We do see it, and we aren't okay with it either." The police have had a great deal on their plate. However, the struggles they have been suffering are self-inflicted. as they are guilty of the same level of complicity as the rest of us white moderates, to respect who is seen as the authority figure. Let me explain what I mean. The weakness of the middle to do nothing, to go with the flow, to not rock the boat, is the same weakness of the same majority within the police force to do nothing when a member of their ranks abuses authority. Like us, they rely on the established system to take care of the problem. They rely on their unions to sort out what should be done. The same organization that protects their job protects the job of those who are not fit to wear the uniform. To attack a fellow officer's employment only places their own employment at risk. The time has come for the middle majority within the police force to unionize, to speak out against the policies of their own unions. In the book Out of This Furnace, the suffering and sacrifices of the workers of the Industrial Revolution are chronicled, explaining step by step how every gain in workers' compensation was fought for through strikes as well as violent workers' riots to accomplish rights we enjoy every single day, such as an 8-hour workday, 40-hour work weeks, free weekends, overtime pay beyond 40 hours a week, and worker compensation for injury on the job, among many, many others. Before these rights were fought for, workers were pushed like slaves. They worked such long days every day of the week and were paid so little they did not have enough money for food, clothing, and housing. They had to choose between those. Every step of the way, they lived at a deficit. They were paid only enough to keep them alive. They were slaves to the tycoons. This is a fact. Unions have their place, and we all owe a debt to those who fought for these rights, which have enriched us with free time to use however we choose to further ourselves, to increase our access to opportunity. However, weaknesses have emerged from union culture. All unions protect the majority by design, but they hinder excellence, no matter what the vocation. But worse, unions also protect members whose performance is so far below mediocre that it trespasses into the criminal. It is apparent that police unions protect bad lemon cops, and rather than holding bad cops responsible and accountable, these unions bury cases and reassign these bad cops to new areas where it is simply a matter of time before they make another offense of stepping beyond their bounds and abusing their position of authority to inflict damage on someone in the public. Because these bad cops are protected by unions, it is now endangering all the good cops. I feel that if the police want to be safe, they must speak up as a whole and demand that their unions get rid of bad cops for the safety of all people. Police officers are also now in danger, as they are being held accountable and are being punished by angry citizens for the trespasses of bad cops. Abolish bad union policies, not the police. The caveat here is that the only people who can change this are the good cops, who make up the majority of the police force everywhere. They must start talking to each other, and like the workers who fought for our rights, they must do what is necessary to force the conversation, to start it at all, that there must be a system put in place whereby the good cops as a majority in their districts can disqualify an unfit servant from continuing the guise of serving and protecting. Does a good soldier or a good cop always obey orders? Perhaps not. I will borrow from Jeffrey R. Holland's adaptation of an account by C.S. Lewis entitled The World's Last Night to frame that statement. In King Lear, there is a man who is such a minor character that Shakespeare has not even given him a name. He is simply called First Servant. All the characters around him, Regan, Cornwall, and Edmund, have fine long-term plans. They think they know how the story is going to end, and they are quite wrong. The servant, however, has no such delusions. He has no notion how the play is going to go, but he understands the present scene. He sees an abomination, the blinding of old Gloucester, taking place. He will not stand for it. His sword is out and pointed at his master's breast in an instant. Then Regan stabs him dead from behind. That is his whole part, 8 lines all told. But Lewis says, if that were real life and not a play, that is the part it would have best to have acted. The first servant now, respectively, is the model police officer. And what did he do when an unjust command was given? He not only refused to obey it, not only did he refuse to stay silent, he turned on his commander, on his employer, on royalty, and points his sword at his master. To make allegory unmistakably clear, if you are given an unjust command, please, for the sake of us all, for the unity of our country, refuse to carry it out. And if you are strong enough to be the first servant, then you can do even more. The master in our day, I feel, are politicians who assert that they will not protect the lives of police in order to gain popularity and endanger the lives of police officers simply to further their own careers. These are my words to the police. If you want the people to remain behind you, then be very careful which orders you choose to enforce from leaders such as these. Speaking to everyone else in a peaceful way, start talking to your coworkers. Ask them where they stand. Where to start? Ask them where they stand, their true stance and feelings on masks. Hopefully, they will not give a politically correct answer as a matter of tact to avoid conflict. Hopefully, they will be honest and say what they really think. And I hope you don't make them feel right or wrong about it. And when you share how you really feel, hopefully they don't make you feel right or wrong about it either. Will they repeat the same words you hear everywhere? Or will they dare to have an independent thought and say what they really feel? Now is the time for courage, social courage, the willingness to be unpopular. We are past the time of seeking a confirmation bias for the sake of feeling safe. There is so much momentum to avoid alienation that we are all obliged to remain silent. Enough is enough. It is important that we talk about it. To hell with the possibility that we might be alienated. Wherever you stand on masks, here is something that's for damn sure. The police will lose the sympathy of the people if they are required to employ brutality to force the people to wear masks. Speaking to the police, if you want the people to rise behind you, if or when the riots rise to new heights, then you must not enforce such petty orders. This is the truth. The aged are being cared for, the vulnerable are protected. Of coworkers and family both, we are being considerate and taking exemplary measures to ensure their safety. We don't need members of the police to compromise their humanity to somehow build on ours. It will not work, and we don't need it. We are being courteous to the aged and the vulnerable. They are protected. Those who care for these groups are taking greater measures of caution. The rest of us need to be able to choose if we are willing to take on a mutual acceptance of risk. Those who are need to be allowed to go back to work. Alexander Hamilton said the following: "The origin of all civil government, justly established, must be a voluntary compact between the rulers and the ruled, and must be liable to such limitations as are necessary for the security of the absolute rights of the latter. For what original title can any man or set of men have to govern others except their own consent? To usurp dominion over a people in their own despite, or to grasp at a more extensive power than they are willing to entrust, is to violate that law of nature which gives every man a right to his personal liberty, and can therefore confer no obligation to obedience. Simplified, if rulers are taking more freedoms from those they rule without their consent, those they rule have no obligation to obey them. I'm going to draw a parallel, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me. Where I'm going next is politically incorrect, but I'm going to say it regardless. Narcissistic relationships demand a hierarchy, a narcissist at the top, and a codependent empath who enables the narcissist's behavior on the bottom. Oftentimes, an empath is aware of the tragic history of the narcissist, which conditioned survival coping mechanisms, which emerged as narcissistic traits. Just as often, the empath says in his heart, I will make it right. All the wrong that has been done to this one person, I will help it heal. An empath has a tremendous level of tolerance, a tremendous amount of love to give. That is why empaths attract narcissists like a homing beacon. Narcissists feed on love and tolerance, but consume it like fuel, and like a drug, they just need more and more of it to feel validated. And thus they consume and try to take more and more till the empath has nothing left to give. It is a socialist relationship, taking from the wealthy and giving to the poor. But with all socialism, eventually it fails. The wealthy, in stocks of love, have given so much of their love that there is no more to give. Eventually, the giver says, enough, I can give no more. After the Holocaust, Germany as a country undertook a magnificent reform in education that continues to this day. The awareness of this education to understand and prevent another Holocaust has yielded a beautiful and powerful country of empaths. The guilt of having been the birthplace of so many atrocities and acts against humanity has resulted in a citizenship of givers with a resolve to atone for the past. Now, Germany is an empathic country, and true to the model has attracted its symbiotic mate, a narcissist nation bent on survival. Like all narcissists, they are the result of their environment. That they are the way they are is not their fault, but they are narcissists nonetheless. The narcissistic nation that was embraced into Germany through their exemplary welcome culture is the Muslim nation. As differences in culture have proven more abrasive than Germany's leadership wished to admit, the empathic citizens absorbed the abuse with angelic levels of tolerance. This tolerance only enabled and emboldened the most brazen outliers of narcissists to expand their territory, test their host's tolerance further, and wait to see what reaction came. Gradually, members of this nation felt so confident as to show their true colors, and on New Year's Eve leading into 2016, they took too much. They pushed too far, and all of the empaths of Germany breathed in unison, enough. It is important to point out that the Muslim faith is a group made of good people, but it is just as important to note that sexual and physical assaults by groups of men are common in the Muslim culture, and such behavior as the subjugation of women to men are tolerated in several of their nations, not in Germany. In that single aforementioned night, over 1,200 German women were sexually assaulted, and shortly after, Germany closed its borders to accepting more Muslim refugees. The acts of a few has ruined the chances of hundreds of thousands of Muslim refugees from entering Germany. Because of the acts of a few, the innocent are denied a safe place of refuge, all from the acts of a few. Here in the United States, The white moderate are a nation of empaths. Like the Germans, they feel guilty for a past they are somehow linked to, but played no part in creating. I feel that way. I feel powerless and tied, that because I am white, I can't say anything. I only hear that because of my privilege. I will never know how hard life is for the blacks in America. My grandfather came to the United States from Denmark when he was 9 years old. I feel I have more in common with illegal immigrants from Mexico than I do with most white Americans. All of my family are immigrants. We never owned a slave. We haven't been here that long. And yet my heart still aches over all the wrongs done to people with African heritage here in this country. I am an American now. This is my country. Like the empaths of Germany, the white moderate here in the United States will tolerate a lot. We have already seen just how much we will tolerate in the last several months. I must add, that isn't limited to simply the white moderate. There's been a tremendous amount of tolerance from all Americans. However, the time can come where we say enough, just like Germany. Not because we are racist, but because it is wrong to allow our businesses and communities to burn. The police should never have to protect the businesses that provide our communities with stability. The owners and employers of those businesses will protect their places of work out of principle. I will do so if I must, and I will defend the business next to mine. It isn't my company, but it's my community, and I will defend my community. If pushed too hard, all of the white moderate will wake up and say, enough, just like the Germans. If that is what Black Lives Matter wants, to incite a war, then shame on you. Black lives do matter. We hear you. You have been targeted. Your people have more obstacles to overcome than many. You are suffering. You are impatient to fix it. No politician or social program will solve the problems and remove the barriers. The only thing that will solve it is more sacrifice, but not the kind of sacrifice you would think. It isn't putting yourself on the front line of a riot and sacrificing yourself to violence. It's the harder kind. It's the kind of sacrifice more and more of the citizens of our country struggle to give. As a man with a passion for pursuing a career in art, I have sacrificed that love and passion for creating for my children that I chose to have and provide for. Believe me, I didn't learn that from society, from Hollywood, or our pop culture. I learned that kind of sacrifice from observing the men in my church, from my religion. That sacrifice from men, from fathers to put aside their passions and wants to care for their children, that is the kind of sacrifice that will remove the problems and lift the barriers. This is generational change. It's slow, and that sucks. My family has been snatching defeat out of the jaws of success for generations. It's my goal to break the trend this time around, but it is taking a lot of patience. The only way that generational change works is if each succeeding generation builds on what their parents built for them. The temptation to backslide is tremendous. I have rulers and peasants in my genealogy, and I am certain that everyone who hears this can say the same. I have witnessed greatness from both. I will continue to sweat to prove that greatness in my own blood. I will never give up, and I hope you won't either. Please, let's work together to make more opportunity for all of our children than we had. No one will give it to us. The public school program will not do it for us. The only way to save the future of our children is to sacrifice our hobbies and leisure time to focus on the development of our children. That is the price that must be paid to prove how much all lives matter, not just Black ones, It is not an easy sacrifice. In all honesty, it is a daily struggle. And some days I am better than others. No one talks about this sacrifice, but it is real and it is hard. Very, very hard. But it is possible and it is worth it. Propagating feelings of white guilt has systematically, by generation, created a society of empaths. But the time has come for this same white moderate class to find a voice and to say how they really feel, rather than allowing the conversations that are shaping our country to continue without them. Those controlling the conversation don't want us to speak and seek to use white guilt to silence us and make us feel disqualified from adding our perspectives to the conversation. The truth is that Black America and the white moderate have far more in common in the things they suffer. From a macro 10,000-foot view, we have been made to appear different. But from a micro, person-to-person scale, life has its way of getting its hooks into all of us. We are all human, and thus we all struggle with the same human frailties, and the temptation to forego accolades in exchange for drama catches us all. As the latter promises just as much fame and attention as spending years to accomplish something significant, it is the default for all humans. We all struggle with that fight. We are not so different. Rather than magnifying our differences, we need to acknowledge them and accentuate the positive in the pursuit of a lasting solution. Darkness cannot chase away darkness. Only love can do that. Prolonged discrimination cultivates a state of paranoid psychosis. As a missionary for the Mormon Church in the Houston, Texas area, I was told often that I was either going to hell or that I was a devil worshiper by the people of Texas. Both of those things are not true, but I heard these words hundreds of times. Even if hundreds of people say the same thing, it does not make it true. A question to ask, however, is, does hearing such things hurt? Because I am a Mormon, do you believe I'm going to hell? If you tell me that, is it hate speech or is it freedom of speech? Or is it just honoring your reality? When people call the police because I am knocking doors in their neighborhood, is that a vigilant citizen looking out for his community, or is it something else? If you believe something that makes you esteem other groups of humans as inferior to you, honoring your reality is discrimination. People telling me that I was going to hell because I'm a Mormon is a truth based on what they have been taught. Them honoring their reality is stating what they believe is a fact, because people of devotion will feel compelled to operate within integrity. They will always honor their reality. Just as many will find these words I am sharing as offensive, I also am honoring my reality. When we are able to change what is taught, then we can alter reality. In the mid-1960s, over 10,000 members of the KKK marched around the White House at their annual meeting. The year I was in Alvin, Texas, in 2006, 88 people showed up for the same meeting. While I consider that a win for progress, I also felt astounded that there were even 88 people who felt hatred so strongly that they would attend, especially as it is no longer popular or accepted to do so. We have a way to go, but it isn't so far away, because this type of change is also generational. The most racist of men are growing old and dying, and their hatred is dying with them. Near the end of my mission, My colleague and I were riding our bikes on Mustang Road in Alvin, Texas, parallel to Alvin Community College, when a car sped by and I heard a grunt behind me. The speed limit is 30 miles per hour on that road, and looking back, I could see something was wrong with my colleague, that he had stopped. It turns out that the car that had sped past had thrown a full 1-liter water bottle at my friend, an Aquafina water bottle, and made a direct hit. A really great shot from a moving car going at least 30 miles per hour, I must admit. But from my colleague's perspective, a 1-liter water bottle weighs about the same as a brick. As soon as I saw what had happened, I thought it was the funniest thing ever. The sinister nature of the act was lost on me. All I could think of is how lucky that I wasn't one that had been hit this time. You see, when things like that happened, I was usually the one to get hit. So I was elated. So in pain, my colleague gets on his bike and we keep riding and go several blocks up, not thinking anything more of it. And we stop on a residential street corner, and as I'm locking up our bikes to a stop sign, a young lady in a white Jeep Cherokee drives up to us and rolls down her window and urgently asks, "Were you the two just riding on Mustang Road?" A little surprised and wary, we said we were. She was upset. She was angry. What happened next surprised me. I expected the usual. "You're going to hell and need to stop harassing people." Or "You people are devil worshippers and need to stop what you're doing." But instead, this is what she said. "I saw what happened. That's discrimination. I followed them and got their license plate number. Do you want to have it?" Her response changed me. It woke me up. It was discrimination. It was wrong. It was no laughing matter. Things like that had happened to me for the full 2 years, and I had never said a thing. I took it like a sheep. The more I stayed silent, the more haters dished it out. What I learned from that brave young woman was, when an act of discrimination happens, the right thing to do is to do what any normal human being would do or should do. And that's call out the behavior for what it is. It's discrimination. It's wrong. After getting so much bad treatment as a missionary so consistently for so long, I came to expect it. Living with that kind of expectation is like waiting for the axe to fall, and is an exercise in the most unhealthy kind of social anxiety. Here's a quick takeaway from my 2 years in Texas. White Baptists were downright mean to us as Mormon missionaries. They were the worst out of them all. On the flip side, the people who treat us the best were the Black Baptists. However it's done, the Black pastors obviously teach the word differently than their white counterparts, and I'll leave that right there. The difference between me and Black people is that I don't wear what makes me different on my skin color. People don't know I'm Mormon unless I tell them. I don't have a name tag on anymore. But once I tell them, I am instantly treated differently. I can see the change in their eyes as they make a pre-made judgment about me based on their view of Mormons and mentally reclassify me. I can see the mental gymnastics happen in real time in their eyes. I hear the change in their speech. They are more careful in their word choice, and after discovering, they are selective with which conversations to include me in. I've gotten used to it, but I still hate it. I just want them to be their normal selves around me. I want them to treat me like I am normal. I can only imagine that my fellow Black brothers and sisters who have experienced prolonged periods of discrimination know exactly what I'm talking about and want the same thing. In visiting with a friend of mine that just happens to have dark skin who is from Alabama, we started discussing discrimination and racism. I told him, with all the things being said about racism, I wonder if I'm a racist. I don't think I am, but things I hear from the media make me think that simply because I am white, that makes me racist, and there's nothing I can do about it. His response put my heart at peace, and I'm so grateful to him to this day for that. perhaps can do the same for you, which is why I'm going to share it. He said, hate is the root of all racism and all discrimination. So you do a self-check and measure how much hate you have in you. Then he shook his head and said something I appreciate so much. He looked at me closely and said, you have no hate in your heart. If you do have hate in your heart, repent and get that shit fixed. To conclude, may God bless you all, and may God continue to bless and guide our marvelous country. We need it now more than ever. Our unique system of government has a lot of problems, but it's still the best out there. A number of years ago, I lived in France from July to November, and I pray to God our country never becomes like theirs. I have never felt so grateful for our country till I came back after experiencing something else. I will close with a quote by Parker Palmer from his book, On the Brink of Everything. I can't think of a sadder way to die than with the knowledge that I never showed up in this world as who I really am. I can't think of a more graced way to die than with the knowledge that I showed up here as my true self, the best I knew how, able to engage life freely and lovingly because I had become fierce with reality. My name is Saul Rip Hansen, and I am a Mormon. I hope that these words have been helpful to someone. Probably going to piss off probably everybody. And too bad. Gotta say it anyway. And yeah, I will continue to pray for our country. And I am eager to see what everyone says. May God bless our country, for sure.